They say every story has a reason, but the one I'm about to tell you, it's a warning, a memory that refuses to stay buried, no matter how much I try to forget. I don't care if you believe me or not. All I ask is that you listen, really listen, till the very end, because somewhere in the middle of this story, you'll realize it could have happened to you. Before we begin, make sure you subscribe. Some stories are meant to entertain you, but this one might follow you. It was already past 6 p.m. when our last lecture ended. Most students rushed out, eager to beat the evening rain, but I stayed behind. I told myself I needed a few quiet minutes to finish my notes, though deep down, I just wanted to sit in the silence. The sun outside had begun to fade, casting long orange shadows to the wide windows. I could hear the faint echo of shoes down the corridor, then nothing. Complete stillness. For a while it was peaceful, too peaceful. I didn't realize in that silence, in a place meant for noise, carries its own kind of voice. I remember closing my notebook and leaning back on the chair. The ceiling fans were off, yet a faint breeze brushed against the back of my neck. I ignored it. My phone battery was dead, and the light outside had dimmed into a grayish hue. When I finally looked around, the emptiness of the room felt unnatural, like the air was heavier than usual. I could still smell chalk dust mixed with a faint scent of old wood and damp walls. Then, faintly, I heard a chair drag at the back of class. I froze. Every other seat was empty. At first, I thought it was the wind, but the sound came again, slow, deliberate. Metal legs scraping against the tile floor, inching closer. My eyes darted to the back row, but there was nothing there. No movement, no shadow, just rows of abandoned desks bathed in dull orange light. I laughed nervously to myself, whispering, "I'm just tired." The room didn't echo. My voice felt swallowed by the air. I packed my books quickly, but as I bent to zip my bag, a faint whisper echoed my words back. "I'm just tired." It sounded almost human. I stood up immediately, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I called, trying to sound brave. No answer, just the creaking of one of the ceiling fans above, swaying slightly even though there was no wind. I grabbed my bag and started walking toward the door, glancing once more at the back of the room. The chairs were exactly as they'd been, except one. A single seat in the last row was turned slightly sideways now, facing the wall instead of the blackboard. I stared at it for a few seconds, unsure if it had always been like that. The corridor outside was dark, the light bulbs flickering weakly. For a second, I thought of leaving, but something inside me hesitated. It wasn't curiosity. It was more like a pull, a quiet, uneasy urge to look again. I stepped back into the classroom and switched on the light. The fluorescent bulb buzzed before flickering to life, bathing the room in a cold white glow. Everything seemed normal again. I sighed in relief, but just then I noticed something odd. On the blackboard, written faintly in chalk, were words that hadn't been there before. "Don't leave yet." I blinked hard. Maybe someone had written it earlier. Maybe I just hadn't noticed. I rubbed the words off quickly, leaving faint white smudges across the board. My fingers trembled a little. I turned off the lights again, ready to go for real this time. But as soon as the bulb went out, I heard something new. 3 slow knocks from inside the classroom cupboard. Knock, knock, knock. I didn't move. My brain tried to reason out. Maybe a rat, maybe expansion. But deep down, something primal told me not to open it. The knock stopped. Silence returned, but it wasn't empty anymore. It felt watchful. I slowly backed away toward the door, holding my breath. Then the cupboard door creaked open by itself, just a little. The sound was quiet, almost polite, like it didn't want to scare me, but it did. My reflection in the glass window beside it looked distorted, like it was moving slightly out of sync. I blinked, and for a split second, I thought I saw another figure beside my reflection, standing right next to me, even though I was alone. I stumbled backward and hit one of the desks. The sound echoed loudly through the room, but the echo didn't fade naturally. It broke like static. My head spun as the lights flickered back on by themselves. Everything was too bright for a moment. Then Slowly, the brightness dimmed back to normal. My reflection looked fine again. The cupboard door was closed. Maybe I was losing it. I picked up my bag and whispered, "I'm done." But as I turned to the door, I heard the same whisper again, this time closer, "Don't go yet." I froze halfway through the doorway. My instincts screamed at me to run, but something stronger made me stay. The air grew colder, pressing against my skin. My breath came out in visible white clouds. This was impossible. It wasn't even cold outside. I turned back toward the room and saw the same desk that had turned sideways before. It was now facing the door directly, as though something was sitting there, watching me. The space behind it shimmered faintly, like heat distortion in reverse, cold air bending light. My fingers tightened around the doorknob. I couldn't tell if I was awake or dreaming anymore. Every part of me wanted to scream, but my voice wouldn't come out. Then, slowly, the chalk on the blackboard began to move on its own, forming new letters, one after another, each stroke careful and deliberate. I stood there, rooted in place as the words appeared. "Now you can't leave." I stared at the board, my stomach twisting. The chalk was still in motion, gliding smoothly across the black surface, though no one held it. The sound, a dry, scratching hiss, made my skin crawl. I stepped back until my spine hit the wall. The lights flickered again, throwing shadows across the desks. Each flicker made it seem like something was moving closer. When the light stabilized, the chalk fell from the board and rolled toward me, stopping at my foot. My heart pounded so loudly I could hear in my ears. I whispered, "This isn't real." But even as I said it, the classroom door slammed shut behind me with a deafening bang. The sound made the windows rattle. I ran to the door and pulled at the handle, but it wouldn't budge, locked from the outside. I hit it hard, shouting for help, though I knew everyone had gone home. My voice echoed strangely, returning to me seconds later, as if the room itself was mocking my desperation. Then something else answered, a faint whisper that seemed to seep from the walls. "You stayed," it murmured. "You shouldn't have stayed." My throat went dry. I turned back to the classroom, scanning every corner. There was no one there, but I could feel something watching. My phone was still dead, but I tried turning it on anyway. No luck. I reached into my bag, searching for my charger, when a sudden, sharp chill hit the back of my neck. I spun around. Nothing. Yet the air behind me shimmered faintly, the way it does above a fire. But this was cold. Freezing cold. My breath fogged in front of me. The smell of chalk was stronger now, almost suffocating. Then, slowly I noticed something new. Every desk in the front row had been moved closer to the blackboard. I hadn't heard a sound, but the change was undeniable. They were forming a line, like seats prepared for an audience. That's when I noticed movement near the teacher's table. The chair that had been tucked in earlier was now pulled out slightly, turned toward me. My stomach tightened as I saw a faint imprint appear on the seat, like someone invisible had just sat down. "Who's there?" I whispered again, but the air swallowed my words. The silence stretched until suddenly the classroom speakers, and used for months, crackled to life. A distorted voice hummed through them, repeating in a rhythmic tone, "Stay, stay, stay." I covered my ears, but the sound seemed to come from inside my head now. The voice stopped as abruptly as it began. The room fell into a heavy silence again, except now I could hear faint footsteps above me, on the ceiling. They moved slowly back and forth, like someone pacing. Dust fell from the ceiling tiles with each step. My eyes followed the sound, then froze when it stopped directly above me. I didn't breathe. For a few seconds, nothing happened. Then, a loud crack split the air as one of the ceiling panels dropped halfway down. Something dark and heavy thudded inside it, scraping metal. I backed away, shaking. The footsteps resumed, this time on the floor. The sound came from the far end of the room, near the windows. I could see nothing but darkness beyond the glass, only my faint reflection staring back at me. But then, slowly, another reflection appeared beside mine, a figure standing close, too close. Its outline was taller than mine, its head tilted unnaturally to one side. I turned instantly, but the space behind me was empty. When I looked back at the window, the reflection was gone. Only me again. I wiped sweat from my forehead, realizing my hands were trembling uncontrollably. My pulse raced as the lights flickered one more time and dimmed to a sickly yellow. I stumbled toward my seat, thinking maybe if I sat, I could think clearly. But as soon as I did, the door creaked open slightly, just enough for a faint sliver of darkness from the hallway to spill in. Relief washed over me. Someone must have come back. I jumped up and ran toward the door, but when I reached it, it slammed shut again, hard enough to rattle the frames. My relief turned to terror. The sound echoed like laughter. I pressed my ear to the wood, listening, faintly. Beneath the thudding of my heart, I heard breathing, deep, slow, and directly on the other side. I stepped back, trembling, staring at the door handle as it began to turn slowly on its own. My voice caught in my throat. The metal clicked once, twice, then stopped. I waited. Silence. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw something move near the blackboard. A shadow gliding across the wall, independent of any light source. It stretched, distorted, crawling upward until it reached the ceiling. My breath hitched as the shadow began forming a shape, a head, shoulders, arms. It was human, but twisted. The outline of a person, but not quite right. Its head turned, and though it had no face, I felt its eyes lock on me. My body refused to move. The shadow slowly peeled itself off the wall, dripping like thick smoke. It hit the ground and stood there, solidifying with each second. I could see faint outlines of clothes, a uniform. My heart stopped as I realized it looked like a student's uniform. It tilted its head again, mimicking the reflection I saw earlier. Then it spoke, not through sound, but directly into my mind. "You took my seat." My knees almost buckled. Before I could react, every chair in the room screeched backward simultaneously, slamming against the walls. The sound was unbearable, a scream of metal and terror. I covered my ears, trembling violently. When the noise stopped, the classroom looked completely different. Desks scattered, lights dimmed, and the blackboard was now covered in words. Hundreds of them, all written in desperate, overlapping chalk. "Stay, stay, stay." My chest heaved as I backed toward the door again, banging against it with all my strength. "Let me out!" I shouted, but the voice returned, louder this time, from all around me. "You shouldn't have stayed after the bell." The realization hit me like ice. This wasn't just a haunting. This was a trap, and I was already part of it. I stood in the middle of the chaos, surrounded by overturned chairs and fading whispers. My head throbbed. I wanted to wake up, to blink and find myself outside, walking home, but the reality pressed against me. Cold, unyielding. I stared at the blackboard. The words were fading, like chalk dissolving into smoke. Only one remained visible. "Look under the desk." My throat tightened. Which desk? There were dozens. I hesitated, but then the front row desk, directly before the blackboard, scraped forward by itself. A faint creak echoed through the air. My instinct screamed to run, but curiosity dragged me closer. Against every logical thought, I knelt and looked beneath it. Beneath the desk, carved deeply into the wood, were initials, TA. The letters looked old, their grooves filled with dust and dried residue that might have been paint, or something worse. As I traced the letters with trembling fingers, a sudden wave of nausea washed over me. A sound followed, soft crying, like someone muffling sobs. I jerked upright, scanning the room. The sound came from the far corner, near the cupboard. It was low at first, then louder, breaking into painful, gasping wails. My eyes locked on the cupboard door. It was shaking violently now, rattling as though something inside was desperate to escape or be heard. I gathered every ounce of courage and approached slowly. The crying grew clearer, a girl's voice young, terrified. "Please," she whimpered. "Please don't lock me in again." My chest tightened. I froze a few steps away. "Who's there?" I asked softly. No answer, only sobs. My trembling hand reached for the handle. The metal was freezing cold, biting into my skin. I hesitated. What if it wasn't human? But the sound, the pain in it, felt real. I couldn't ignore it. I pulled the handle open in one swift motion. The cupboard creaked, empty inside. No one. Yet the crying continued, louder now, echoing directly behind me. I spun around fast, expecting someone to be standing there, but the room was empty. The sound of crying stopped mid-breath, replaced by silence so sharp it rang in my ears. Then, in the reflection of the classroom window, I saw her, a girl around my age, standing just behind me. Her uniform was stained, her hair clinging wetly to her face. Her eyes were hollow, black, bottomless. I turned instantly, but she wasn't there. The reflection, however, still showed her, motionless, watching me. I stumbled backward, bumping into a desk. "What do you want from me?" I whispered. Her lips moved in the reflection, but no sound came. Suddenly, the lights went out completely. The classroom sank into darkness. I could still see the faint glow from outside the windows, outlining the desks in eerie silhouettes. Then, from somewhere near the back, I heard footsteps again, bare feet slapping softly against the cold tiles. They grew closer, faster. I moved toward the wall, feeling for the switch, but my fingers touched something else, wet fabric. I pulled back in horror, realizing it wasn't the wall at all, but a shoulder. I froze. The smell of damp earth and iron filled my nose. Then, a voice whispered inches from my ear, "You took her place?" I screamed and stumbled away, crashing into desks. The lights flickered back on for a split second, and I saw her standing near the blackboard. Her skin was pale gray, her eyes sunken deep into darkness. Her hands were clasped together, as if in prayer. I blinked, and she was gone, but her shadow remained, burned into the board like a stain. I rushed to the door again, pulling desperately, kicking, pounding. Nothing worked. Then I noticed the time on the classroom clock. It was frozen at 6:47 p.m., the exact time the last student had left earlier. My stomach dropped. I hadn't been stuck for minutes. Time itself had stopped with me inside. The silence felt heavier now, pressing down on my chest. I turned to face the blackboard once more, and new words appeared beneath the shadow's outline. T.A. Trisha Desna died here. My breath caught in my throat. The initials, the voice, the crying. It all made sense now. But how? Who was she? Before I could think further, I felt the air shift again, a soft breeze that carried faint whispers all around me, overlapping, pleading. Find me, tell them. Don't let me fade. I clutched my head as the voices multiplied, merging into one painful chorus of sorrow and rage. The windows rattled violently. Papers flew into the air, and the blackboard cracked down the middle with a deafening snap. Stop! I shouted, though my voice was swallowed by the storm of sound. The lights burst, showering sparks that flickered out instantly, leaving me in near darkness. Amid the chaos, I saw something glowing faintly under Trisha's desk, a small silver pendant, half buried in dust. My instincts told me it mattered. I crawled toward it, ignoring the whispers, the moving shadows, the cold hands brushing past my face. As soon as my fingers touched the pendant, everything stopped. Silence, stillness, the air froze around me. The pendant was engraved with the same initials, T.A. and a year, 1998. I turned it over, realized it was a locket. Inside was a tiny photograph of a girl smiling in the same uniform I wore now. My heart sank. She wasn't just any student. She was from this school. My school. The back of the photo had faint writing. He said he'd wait after class. The letters were shaky, smeared. I barely had time to process it before the temperature in the room dropped again. Frost began forming on the windows. My breath came out in white clouds. The whisper returned, softer this time. He never came. I stood up, clutching the locket tightly. Trisha. I whispered, "What happened to you?" The classroom lights flickered one last time and steadied. Then, standing at the teacher's desk, she appeared again, clearer now. Not pale, not monstrous, just sad. Her eyes glistened with tears that never fell. She raised her hand slowly, pointing toward the far corner of the room where the old supply closet stood. My heart pounded as I followed her gaze. "There?" I asked quietly. She nodded once, and then, like dust caught in light, her form began to fade. Only her whisper remained. "Don't let him hide again." I took a hesitant step toward the supply closet. The air felt thicker with every breath, like I was walking underwater. The floor creaked beneath my shoes, even though the classroom had never made a sound before. My hands trembled as I reached the closet door. The metal handle was cold, almost frozen, and left a thin layer of condensation on my fingers. My mind screamed for me to stop, but Trisha's whisper echoed faintly in my head. "Don't let him hide again." My throat went dry. I pulled the door slowly, expecting darkness. Instead, a faint yellow light glowed from inside, flickering like an old candle struggling to stay alive. The light revealed a narrow space lined with broken shelves and dusty boxes. Old examination papers, forgotten tools, and rusted mops filled the cramped room. But what drew my attention was a faint outline of something carved into the back wall. Letters, faint but legible. "Help me." My chest tightened. The words were etched deep, as if scratched by trembling hands. I stepped closer, shining my phone's weak screen light. That's when I saw it. Dark stains trailing down from the carving, dried into the concrete. It wasn't ink. I reached out to touch the marks, but the instant my fingers grazed the surface, a deafening scream exploded inside my head. I staggered back, clutching my ears. The sound wasn't coming from outside. It was inside my mind, layered with hundreds of overlapping voices crying out in pain, begging, pleading. He locked the door. We told him to stop. She wouldn't scream anymore. I dropped to my knees, gasping for air. The light inside the closet began flickering faster, casting long shadows that stretched and twisted. Then through the noise, one voice rose above the rest. A girl's voice, trembling but clear. "He killed me here." My blood turned to ice. "Who?" I shouted desperately. "Who did this to you?" But only silence answered, a silence heavy enough to feel. The silence didn't last long. A soft thud came from behind one of the shelves, like something falling or shifting. My legs shook as I moved the boxes aside, revealing an old wooden trapdoor embedded in the floor. The edges were darkened, the hinges rusted. My breath caught in my throat. I hadn't noticed it before. The air leaking through the cracks smelled of dampness and rot. My heart raced as I crouched down, running my hand along the edges. The wood felt sticky. "Don't!" Trisha's voice whispered faintly, almost pleading now. "Please don't open it." But I had to. I needed to know what was hidden below. The trapdoor creaked open after a hard pull. A rush of cold, foul air escaped, making me gag. My flashlight barely pierced the darkness below, revealing old steps descending into what looked like a small cellar or maintenance space. I hesitated at the edge, but something compelled me downward. Each step groaned beneath my weight, the air growing colder and thicker. When I reached the bottom, I found a narrow room no larger than a storage closet. The walls were cracked and damp. In the center sat a single chair, broken, stained, and covered in cobwebs. Beside it lay a pile of torn notebooks and what looked like a human shoe. I crouched beside the pile, my hands trembling as I brushed away the dust. The notebooks were old, their pages brittle and yellowed. On the first one, scrawled in fading ink were the words, "Property of Trisha Desna." My chest constricted. I flipped through the pages, skimming random lines. He said I was special. He said he'd stay after class. He lied. Another line read, "I can hear them above, laughing. They don't know I'm down here." My stomach twisted. I closed the notebook quickly, heart racing. The air felt heavier now, pressing down on me as though the room itself disapproved of my discovery. Suddenly, the temperature dropped sharply, frost again forming on the walls, creeping toward me like living veins. My breath became visible again. Then came the footsteps, slow, deliberate, descending the stairs behind me. I froze in place, unable to turn around. Each step echoed like a hammer strike. When they stopped, I felt it, warm air brushing against the back of my neck, followed by a voice low, male, and calm. "You shouldn't have found this." I spun around instantly, my flashlight shaking wildly. But no one was there. Only the staircase leading back up, bathed in faint gray light. I could still feel his breath lingering on my skin. I backed toward the far wall, clutching the notebook against my chest. "Who are you?" I shouted, my voice cracking. No answer. The shadows seemed to shift, stretching upward, forming a tall, hunched silhouette near the stairs. I could make out faint details, broad shoulders, a long coat, something metallic glinting in one hand. My stomach turned. "You're him," I whispered, the one who... Before I could finish, the figure lunged forward. The flashlight flickered violently, and for a split second, I saw his face. Sunken eyes, pale skin, lips pressed into an almost tender smile. Then darkness swallowed everything again. I ran, scrambling up the stairs, gasping for breath. Behind me, the sound of footsteps grew louder, faster than mine. The door above slammed shut before I could reach it, trapping me in total blackness. I banged against it, screaming, but the sound was devoured by the echoing void. Then his voice returned, whispering from every corner. She wouldn't leave when I told her. Neither will you. The floor beneath my feet shuddered violently. Dust fell from the ceiling. I screamed Trisha's name, begging for help. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, faintly, I heard her whisper again, urgent, desperate. "Use the light." I fumbled through my pocket, remembering the lighter I used earlier for a candle experiment in class. My hand shook so badly I almost dropped it. I flicked it once, twice, then flame. A small, trembling light illuminated the darkness. And there he was, standing inches from me, face twisted with fury, eyes black and endless. He raised his hand, holding something sharp and rusted. But before he could move, the flame flared brighter than before, filling the cellar with blinding light. He screamed, a sound that felt both human and not, then dissolved into smoke. I collapsed to the floor, gasping, as the trapdoor above swung open by itself. I crawled out the trapdoor, coughing, the lighter still burning faintly in my shaking hand. The air above felt different, thicker, almost alive. The classroom looked the same, yet something was off. Every desk was perfectly aligned again. The lights were on, and the clock now ticked normally. 6:48 p.m. Only 1 minute had passed. My hands were covered in dust and something dark that I didn't want to identify. I turned toward the supply closet, but it was gone. Just a blank wall now, as if it had never existed. My body trembled as I whispered, "What did I just see?" Then, faintly, Trisha's locket grew warm in my palm. I stared down at the pendant. The metal pulsed gently, as though something inside it was alive. "Trisha?" I whispered. The air shifted again. A shadow swept across the floor, and for a moment, I saw her reflection in the window, standing beside me, her expression solemn. "He's gone," I said, but she didn't answer. Instead, she pointed toward the door, her lips forming a single word, "Run." My heart skipped. The lights flickered once more. I turned to grab my bag, but before I could, the chairs at the back of class toppled over violently, one after another, as if something invisible was storming toward me. I ran to the door and twisted the handle. It opened easily this time. I stumbled into the hallway, panting. The corridor was dimly lit, silent, and empty. Relief flooded me for a second. I was free, but as I started down the hall, the door behind me slammed shut, the echo rattling the lockers. My steps faltered. The temperature dropped again. Every fluorescent light above me began to flicker in sequence, one by one, following my path like a predator stalking from above. Then, somewhere far down the corridor, I saw it, a figure standing motionless under the last flickering light. He was waiting. I froze. Even from that distance, I could tell it was the same tall man from the cellar. His outline was sharp against the dim glow, his head tilted slightly, just like before. My breath hitched. I blinked once, and he was gone. The light at the far end went out completely. Then came the sound of shoes tapping lightly on the tiles, slow and deliberate, approaching from the darkness. I backed away, my heart hammering against my ribs. "Leave me alone." I shouted. No response. Just a steady rhythm of approaching steps, echoing off the walls like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I turned and ran. My footsteps pounded through the corridor, bouncing off the cold walls. I reached the stairwell and bolted down, 2 steps at a time, until I reached the first floor. The exit door was right ahead. Freedom. I pushed against a metal bar, but it didn't move. I slammed my shoulder into it again and again, but it was like hitting stone. Behind me, the footsteps continued, slower now, almost teasing. I turned and saw shadows stretching down the staircase, long, impossible shapes crawling toward me. I screamed and slammed the door one more time. This time it burst open, and I stumbled out into the night. Cold air hit my face. The campus was empty, the streetlights flickering under a fog that hadn't been there earlier. I ran toward the gate, my lungs burning, my ears ringing with phantom footsteps that might have been my own. When I looked back, the building loomed behind me, dark, silent, and still. I stopped only when I reached the gate and grabbed the bars, shaking them. Locked. My voice cracked as I called out, "Security! Anyone!" The only reply was a distant rustling of trees. Then behind me, I heard again, slow footsteps approaching, steady and patient, like someone who knew I had nowhere left to go. I turned, pressing my back against the gate. The fog had thickened, curling around the courtyard like living mist. I could barely see 5 feet ahead. The footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped just beyond the veil of fog. "Why me?" I whispered. The voice that answered wasn't his. It was hers. Trisha's. "Because you stayed," she said softly, her tone filled with sorrow. "That's how it starts." I looked around wildly, trying to find her, but her voice came from everywhere and nowhere. "He was never buried," she whispered again. "That's why he walks." My stomach twisted. "Then where is he?" I asked. The answer chilled me. "Beneath." The ground beneath my feet vibrated faintly, a low rumble building beneath the concrete. The fog swirled violently, and the sound of chains rattled faintly in the distance. I stumbled backward, heart pounding, as cracks began to form on the pavement. The vibration grew stronger, and from the largest crack, something black began seeping through, thick and tar-like. I stepped back in horror as the liquid began taking shape, rising, stretching upward until it formed a figure. Him. The same man. But now, his face was clearer, half-burnt, half-human, eyes hollow yet burning with hatred. "You freed me," he whispered. "Now take her place." I screamed and turned to run, but the gate behind me slammed shut on its own. The fog surged inward, swirling around the figure, like it was feeding on it. His hand reached out impossibly long, the fingers stretching toward me. I fell to the ground, clutching the locket against my chest. It glowed fiercely, a beam of white light shooting from it, striking the figure directly in the chest. He shrieked, the sound so sharp it made my ears bleed. His form began to crumble like ash, scattering into the mist. The ground stopped shaking, and everything went silent. Too silent. I stayed there for what felt like hours, trembling, staring at the spot where he had vanished. Slowly, the fog began to lift. The campus returned to its usual, eerie stillness. I pushed myself to my feet, breathing hard. The locket was still warm, but the glow had faded completely. I looked down at it, cracked, broken, its chain rusted. A strange calm washed over me. Maybe it was finally over. Maybe she was free. But as I turned toward the building one last time, every window on the top floor flickered with light, and in one of them, a shadow waved. I stood frozen, staring at that waving shadow in the window. The light flickered once more, then vanished, leaving nothing but the reflection of the moon. My breath fogged in the cold air. I whispered, "Trisha?" But deep down, I knew it wasn't her. Something else had learned her shape. The locket, now cracked, throbbed faintly against my chest. I took one cautious step backward, then another, my shoes scraping the pavement. Just as I turned to leave, a faint sound echoed from the building. Chalk dragging across a blackboard. Long, slow, deliberate, like someone was writing a message meant only for me. Curiosity has always been my downfall. I should have walked away, but that sound, scratching, whispering, pulled me back. I crept toward the window, each step echoing across the empty courtyard. The classroom light flickered again, and for a brief second, I saw words appear on the board. My heart stopped. It said, "You're still inside." I blinked, and the writing vanished. "No," I muttered, stepping back. "I'm outside. I'm done." Yet everything around me began to twist. The wind shifting direction, the fog curling back toward the school like smoke inhaling itself. The clock tower struck 7, but the sound was hollow, wrong, and it didn't stop. The bell kept ringing, each chime vibrating through my bones. I pressed my hands over my ears, but it only grew louder, metal scraping against metal, echoing through my skull. The lights on the campus began to flicker in rhythm with the sound. I stumbled backward, disoriented. Then, I saw movement in the reflection of the school's glass doors. The corridor inside was no longer empty. Desks were stacked in chaotic patterns, chairs hanging from the ceiling like skeletons. In the center stood the shadowed figure, facing the board, still writing. The bell stopped abruptly. My heartbeat didn't. I whispered, "I never left, did I? I don't remember when I made the decision to go back inside." Maybe it wasn't even a decision. Maybe the place wanted me to return. The moment I stepped through the doors, the temperature dropped sharply. The corridor was darker now, every light buzzing like a dying insect. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud, like the building was hollow. As I approached the classroom, I noticed something strange. Every door I passed had a reflection of me in the tiny glass window, but they weren't exact. In one, I was smiling. In another, crying. And in one, I wasn't human at all. When I reached the classroom door, it was already open. The smell of chalk dust and something burnt filled the air. The blackboard was clean, except for a single phrase scrawled across it. "You saw him. Now you belong." My throat went dry. I turned around quickly, but the hallway behind me had changed. Walls longer, lights dimmer. There was no exit anymore, just a corridor stretching into nothingness. My mind raced. Maybe I was dreaming, maybe still trapped below the cellar. But when I pinched my arm, pain flared. It was real, too real. Somewhere in the dark, I heard a girl sobbing softly. I followed the sound, though every part of me screamed not to. The sobbing grew louder, echoing through the corridor. It led to a classroom I didn't recognize, one with shattered windows and desks scattered like bones. I stepped inside carefully. A girl sat in the corner, her head buried in her arms, trembling. "Trisha?" I whispered. She looked up. My stomach turned. Her face was pale, half missing, her eyes wide and empty. "You came back," she said, voice layered, echoing with others. "You shouldn't have." I took a step back, shaking my head. "You needed help." Her lips trembled. "I did, but now you're next." The walls began to breathe, literally swell and deflate like lungs. The air grew heavy, each breath harder to take. The classroom door slammed shut behind me, sealing us in. "He doesn't let go," Trisha whispered, her body shaking violently. "He feeds on presence, not fear." Her voice distorted, echoing from all corners of the room. Desks slid across the floor, forming a circle around us. The blackboard cracked, revealing faint writing beneath the surface. I squinted through the dust and realized it wasn't chalk. It was carved. "Another stays when one leaves." The words rearranged themselves, burning fresh lines into the board. "You stayed." My vision blurred. I felt lightheaded, dizzy as if the room was spinning. Trisha's form flickered between human and shadow, her face splitting into dozens of expressions. Fear, pain, anger, pleading. "You can break it," she said suddenly. "The locket, destroy it." I hesitated, clutching the broken chain. "It's all I have left of you." She screamed. "It's what binds him." The lights exploded, plunging the room into darkness. I could feel the floor pulsing under my hands, the faint vibration of something crawling beneath it. I raised the locket high, ready to smash it against the floor. Then a cold hand grabbed my wrist. I couldn't move. The grip was ice cold, fingers digging into my skin. A whisper slithered near my ear. She lied. It said, "Break it, and she dies forever." My breath caught. Trisha's voice echoed in the dark. "Don't listen to him." The room shook violently, desks clattering, glass raining down. I screamed, torn between two impossible choices. The air filled with whispers, laughter, and distant cries, all blending into madness. I could feel both presences tugging at me, Trisha's warmth and his cold emptiness. "Choose," the voice hissed. "Now." My heart pounded as I lifted the locket one last time, not knowing which fate I'd release. With a final scream, I slammed the locket to the ground. It shattered like glass, releasing a blinding flash of light that consumed the entire room. The sound stopped. The shaking stopped. Everything went still. When my vision cleared, Trisha was gone. So was the shadow. Only silence remained. The wall stopped breathing. The desk stood still. I fell to my knees, exhausted, trembling. Maybe it was over this time. Maybe I had finally broken it. But as I stared at the floor where the locket had shattered, I saw words forming from the cracks, glowing faintly. "You freed her. Now it's your turn." The cracks in the floor pulsed faintly, the glowing words fading into darkness. I sat there for a long time, unable to move. My head was spinning, my thoughts scattered like broken glass. The air felt different now, lighter, quieter, but heavy inside me, as if the silence itself had weight. I took a deep breath, and for the first time, the air tasted wrong, metallic, cold. I pushed myself up slowly and walked toward the door. It opened easily without a sound. The hallway was empty again. Everything looked normal, but I wasn't. I could feel something crawling beneath my skin, something that didn't belong. As I stepped into the hallway, I realized the lights weren't flickering anymore. They were dim but steady. The building looked like it had before the horror began. Clean, quiet, familiar, but every sound echoed too sharply. Every shadow felt too precise. My reflection in the classroom window didn't move when I did. It stared at me, its expression blank, eyes black and hollow. "You freed her," it mouthed silently. Then it smiled, slow, unnatural. I stepped back in fear, and the reflection followed, mimicking movements I hadn't made yet. It leaned closer to glass, lips forming one more phrase. "You're home now." I turned and ran down the corridor, heart pounding. The exit was still visible, glowing faintly with moonlight through the glass doors. I sprinted toward it, but with every step, the hallway seemed to stretch longer. The doors drifted farther away, distant as a dream. I screamed in frustration, my voice bouncing endlessly. Suddenly, every door along the hall burst open at once. Papers, books, and broken desks flying out violently. The sound was deafening. Then everything froze midair. Books hovered motionless around me and whispers filled the silence. "Stay, stay," they sounded like hundreds of voices, all speaking in unison from the walls themselves. I stumbled backward, shielding my ears, but the voices crawled inside my head. "You freed her," they repeated. "Now take her place." My vision blurred. I tried to scream again, but my throat tightened as though invisible hands were around it. My body convulsed, collapsing to the floor. The corridor stretched and rippled, the walls bending inward. Through the haze, I saw faint outlines of faces. Students, teachers, people trapped between time and death, staring from inside the walls. Their eyes followed me as I crawled, begging for release. One of them whispered, "We all stayed too long." Then their mouths opened wide and screamed in silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was lying on a desk. The classroom looked exactly as it had after lecture. Neat, organized, daylight spilling softly through the windows. My heart raced. Had it all been a hallucination? A nightmare? I looked around, disoriented. The clock on the wall ticked normally. My bag was beside my chair. My phone buzzed on the desk. 7:02 p.m. Only an hour had passed since the lecture ended. I let out a shaky laugh, half in relief, half disbelief. But then I noticed something strange. My notebook was open to a page I didn't remember writing on. At the top, It said, Lesson 1, The Replacement. My hands trembled as I flipped through the pages. Every line was filled with neat handwriting. But it wasn't mine. The words repeated over and over. The one who stays becomes the one who teaches. I dropped the notebook, backing away from the desk. The chalkboard behind me now had words scrawled across it in white dust. Welcome to the next lesson. I spun around, but the classroom door had vanished again. Panic rose in my chest. I banged against the wall where the door had been, shouting for help. The walls didn't echo this time. They absorbed the sound completely, as though listening. I turned back to the chalkboard, breathing hard. A piece of chalk floated by itself, scratching new words. Attendance required. My name appeared below it. One by one, more names began appearing. Trisha, Mark, several others I didn't recognize. When the chalk stopped, a new word appeared beneath the list. Incomplete. My name was the only one still glowing. I shouted, "What do you want from me?" The chalk dropped. Then, in a voice that wasn't human, the classroom itself answered, "Presence." The floorboards creaked, the desks trembled, and shadows began crawling up the walls again like spilled ink coming alive. I backed into the corner as the desks slowly turned toward me, their legs scraping the ground in a chorus of metallic groans. The chalkboard lightened, glowing faintly with a sickly green hue. My reflection appeared on its surface, but this time it was smiling. "You understand now," it said softly, though my lips didn't move. "The classroom never empties. It collects." I shook my head violently. "No, I'm not staying here." My reflection's grin widened. "You already are." Then it reached out from the chalkboard, its hand stretching through the surface like liquid glass, fingers brushing my cheek. It was ice cold. The touch burned. My skin turned pale where it touched me, veins glowing faintly beneath the surface. I stumbled backward, clawing at my face. My reflection laughed, the sound echoing through every wall, every desk. The windows shattered inward, shards floating in midair before freezing completely. Then came the whispers again, hundreds of them, whispering in rhythm with my heartbeat. "Stay, stay, stay." I screamed, smashing the nearest desk against the chalkboard, but the surface absorbed the impact like water. My reflection leaned forward, whispering, "You're part of the lesson now. The students will arrive soon." My stomach dropped. "Students?" A loud bell rang, sharp and metallic. The sound vibrated through the floor. I turned toward the door that hadn't been there a moment ago. It opened slowly, revealing silhouettes entering one by one. Students. Their faces were pale, their movements mechanical. They took their seats quietly, eyes hollow, notebooks open. I stumbled backward, shouting, "Get out! You're not real." But none of them moved. They just stared at me in unison. Then, as one, they spoke, "Good evening, Professor." My blood ran cold. I looked down and saw I was holding a piece of chalk in my own trembling hand. The chalk fell from my fingers and clattered onto the floor. I stared at the rows of motionless students. Their faces were blank masks, their eyes dull and glassy, yet fixed on me as if waiting for instruction. My mouth moved before I could stop it. "Oh, open your books," I whispered. The words weren't mine. They felt borrowed. Every student obeyed at once. The rustle of pages was the only sound. I tried to shout that I wasn't their teacher, but no voice came out. Instead, my hand rose of its own accord, tracing words on the board. Lesson 2, Obedience. The chalk screeched. My reflection smiled from the glass. The lesson began without meaning. I heard myself explaining things I didn't understand. Rules of the classroom, names of those who never leave. Each sentence echoed twice, once from my mouth and again from somewhere beneath the floor. The students repeated after me in perfect unison. Their voices blended into a low hum that vibrated the windows. When I paused, the room demanded continuation. Silence itself hurt. I realized the truth then. The class wasn't listening to learn. It was feeding. Every word I spoke kept something satisfied, something old and hungry, hiding behind the walls where light could not reach. Time lost meaning. Minutes or hours passed. maybe days. I taught endlessly, reciting lessons I'd never written. My body moved automatically while my mind screamed in the background. Each time I blinked, a new topic appeared on the board. Discipline, sacrifice, replacement. Between subjects, I caught glimpses of Tricia seated in the last row. She no longer looked afraid. She smiled faintly, her lips forming the words, "Almost done." But I knew she didn't mean freedom. She meant completion. Every class ended the same way, with a roll call that never included me. And each time, one student vanished before the next bell rang. When the 10th student disappeared, the walls began to bleed chalk dust that fell like snow. The air thickened with the smell of old paper and burnt wood. I dropped the chalk, gasping for breath, and the students lifted their heads simultaneously. Their eyes glowed faintly. "Professor," they murmured. The exam, a stack of blank papers, materialized on the desk. I stumbled backward as they reached for pens, scratching invisible words onto invisible questions. The sound of their writing filled the room like insects crawling across metal. I covered my ears, but it only grew louder until I screamed and the world went white. When sight returned, the classroom was empty again. Papers lay scattered across every desk. Each sheet contained only one line, written in identical handwriting. "Pass it on." My heart hammered. I turned toward the window. Dawn light seeped through cracked glass, soft and harmless. The clock read 6 a.m. Maybe it was over. I gathered my bag, clutching like a lifeline, and stepped into the hallway. Everything looked normal. Birds sang outside. Relief washed over me, so suddenly I laughed. But as I reached the main doors, a reflection in the display case caught my eye and stopped me cold. In the glass, I saw the same hallway, but without me in it. The doors were closed, the lights off, dust covering everything. I turned around. The real corridor was clean and bright. Two realities overlapping. The reflection moved first, walking toward me from inside the glass, its smile identical to mine. "Class dismissed," it said. I staggered back. The surface rippled like water. I ran, sprinting down the stairs, but every window reflected that same version of me, closer each time. By the time I reached the ground floor, the reflections were whispering in unison. "You can't leave early again." I burst through the exit. The morning air hit my face like a slap. Students were arriving for their lectures, chatting, laughing, alive. For a moment, I almost cried with relief. Then one of them looked at me strangely. "Sir, are you taking attendance today?" she asked. I froze. "I'm not," I started to say, but the words caught. She pointed to my shirt pocket. A piece of chalk stuck out, bright white against the fabric. "We have your class in 15 minutes, she said cheerfully, then walked away. My hand trembled as I touched the chalk. It was warm. I tried to throw it away, but my fingers wouldn't release it. Panic clawed at my throat. I ran across the campus, shouting for help, but no one seemed to hear. Students walked past like I wasn't there at all. I reached the security gate. It stood wide open now, freedom within reach. Yet as I stepped through, a sudden weight pulled me back. The air thickened, resisting every move forward. I fell to my knees, gasping. The chalk in my hand glowed faintly. From somewhere behind me, a bell rang once, then again, and again, each chime slower, heavier, final. I looked over my shoulder. The classroom building loomed under the morning sun, ordinary yet expectant. Shadows stretched from its windows toward me like grasping fingers. The final bell echoed across the courtyard, and all at once, silence swallowed the world. My phone buzzed weakly in my pocket. One new message. I unlocked the screen with shaking hands. It was from an unknown number. The text read, "Attendance incomplete. Please report to room 302. The chalk in my hand cracked down the middle. Dust spilled across my palm, forming a single word. Now. I don't remember walking back. One moment the gate was in front of me. The next, I was standing in the doorway of room 302. Sunlight poured through the window, warm and normal. Desks waited, empty, on the board. Someone had already written the date, and beneath it, my name followed by the word instructor. I felt tears slip down my face. The bell rang one last time. Footsteps echoed in the hallway, drawing nearer. I whispered to the empty room, "Please, not again." But the door opened, and a group of students filed in, smiling politely. "Good morning, Professor," they said. "Days, maybe weeks, have passed since that morning. I don't leave room 302 anymore." The students arrive and depart with clockwork precision, each lesson identical to the last. Outside the window, the weather never changes. The same sunlight, the same clouds, frozen in place like a photograph. I've stopped trying to count time. My phone battery died long ago, though it still vibrates occasionally, buzzing against the desk with no display. Sometimes I answer it anyway, holding it to my ear. There's always breathing on the other end, slow, familiar, like my own voice echoing through a tunnel. The faces of the students blur together now. I think they change, but I can't tell anymore. When I take attendance, new names appear on the list, yet every voice sounds the same answering, "Here." Their notebooks fill themselves with words I don't remember saying. At the end of each class, they stand, bow their heads, and whisper in unison, "Thank you for staying." I nod automatically. The gratitude feels genuine, which makes it worse. When the room empties, I sometimes see fresh footprints appear in the dust by the door, larger, heavier than any students. At night, I sleep on the teacher's desk. I dream of my old life, friends, lectures, normalcy, but each dream ends with me turning around to face a classroom full of shadows. I wake up sweating, the chalkboard glowing faintly in the dark, words writing themselves across it. Tomorrow's lesson, continuity. I've tried erasing it, but the chalk reforms the instant I turn away. Once, I smashed the board with a chair. The sound drew laughter from the hallway, hundreds of voices laughing at once. When I opened the door, the corridor was empty except for a mirror nailed to the wall. The mirror shows me standing at the front of the room, teaching. Even when I move away, the reflection keeps going. Sometimes it waves. Sometimes it mouths words I can't hear. Once, I leaned close, trying to listen. The surface rippled, and I felt my reflection's breath on my face. It whispered, "Class never ends." I smashed the mirror, but the shards simply floated in midair, rearranging themselves back into a perfect pane. That was the first time I realized I couldn't die here. The thought should have been comforting, but it felt like another lock clicking shut. The more I resist, the stronger the classroom becomes. Desks rearrange themselves if I move them. The chalk leaps into my hand when I try to drop it. Even silence doesn't belong to me anymore. The room hums softly when I stop speaking. A heartbeat that isn't mine. I've started marking days on the wall with a piece of broken tile. There are 37 marks so far. Or maybe 37 lessons. I can't tell. The marks sometimes fade overnight, replaced by a single phrase scratched into the plaster. Still here. Once, during what I think was a Sunday, I heard footsteps in the corridor. Real ones, not echoes. A janitor appeared at the door, keys jangling. He looked inside, squinting. "Didn't know anyone still used this room," he said. My throat went dry. "Please," I croaked, "help me." His expression shifted to confusion. "This wing's been sealed for years." He stepped back, eyes widening as he looked directly at me. "Sir," he whispered, "you're not." The lights flickered. When they steadied, the doorway was empty again. His mop bucket remained, still dripping water that steamed on the tiles. The drip never stops. Every few seconds, it taps against the floor, a steady metronome marking the nothingness of time. I talk to it sometimes, just to hear another rhythm besides my own breathing. "How long have we been here?" I asked it yesterday. It answered with another drop. The water never forms a puddle. It just disappears into floor. I think the classroom drinks it. The walls look damp now, darker the edges, veins of moisture spreading upward like roots. When I press my ear against them, I hear voices murmuring lessons in languages I don't know. My handwriting has changed. It's smaller, more precise, almost elegant. Sometimes I find notes written in it that I don't remember composing. One lies on the desk right now. The cycle is complete when belief replaces memory. I don't know what that means. The chalkboard shows a new lesson title, History of the Room. I try to ignore it, but curiosity gnaws at me. The moment I face the board, the walls fade away, revealing glimpses of decades past. Students in old uniforms, teachers I've never seen, all repeating the same lessons. Every one of them ends up standing where I stand now. I saw Trisha again today. She sat in the back row, smiling sadly. "You lasted longer than most," she said. "They'll forget you soon." I asked what she meant. They always forget the ones who stay. The building hides them, and time fills a gap. I wanted to ask if she was free now, but she was already fading. Before she vanished completely, she whispered, "When the new one stays, you'll remember who you were." The words lodged in my mind like splinters. I realized then that forgetting might be mercy. Tonight, the chalkboard writes by itself again. Tomorrow, orientation. My reflection watches from the window, tapping its fingers impatiently on the glass. I think it's waiting for someone. Maybe a new professor. Maybe a student who lingers too long after lecture. I can feel the room humming with anticipation, the air thick with welcome. I should warn them, but I don't know how anymore. My voice belongs to the classroom now. So I wait, chalk in hand, as the lights dim and the bell tolls once. The door creaks open. Footsteps enter, and I say, "Good evening, everyone. Please take your seats." The air feels colder tonight. Not the kind of cold that bites the skin, but one that settles inside the bones, quiet and heavy. I hear faint footsteps echoing down the hallway, new ones, hesitant human. A door opens somewhere, and I recognize the familiar rhythm of a student packing up after lecture. My heart, if it's still mine, beats faster. The sound grows clearer, closer, until it stops right outside room 302. I stand frozen at the front of class, facing the chalkboard. The doorknob rattles once, twice. A curious whisper breaks the silence. "Is someone still here?" I want to shout, "Don't come in," but the words die in my throat. The door creaks open, and a young man steps inside, backpack slung over one shoulder, eyes adjusting to the dim light. He looks just like I did years ago, before all this began. "Sir," he calls out softly, "I think I left my phone." I open my mouth to respond, but another voice speaks instead. It sounds exactly like mine. Calm, authoritative, practiced. "It's all right," it says. "Come in. You can sit anywhere." I turn toward the sound, horrified, and see myself standing behind the desk. The version of me at the desk smiles kindly at the student. He gestures toward an empty seat, chalk in hand. "Since you're here," he says, "why not stay for the next lesson?" The boy hesitates, glancing toward the door, but the handle has already vanished. He swallows hard and sits. My reflection begins to write on the board. Lesson 1, the nature of staying. I try to move, to scream, but my limbs no longer respond. Instead, I feel the walls drawing closer, their whispers merging into a single rhythmic chant. Stay, stay, stay. I realize then that this is how it begins. Every new occupant arrives innocent, late, curious, unaware of the weight this room carries. The old one watches helplessly as the classroom chooses its replacement. It doesn't kill you. It consumes you slowly, repurposes you into its next storyteller. The boy's eyes dart around nervously, but soon his fear fades. He's listening now, nodding as the lesson continues. I can feel the room feeding on his attention. That's the secret. It thrives on awareness, on being observed. Once you acknowledge it exists, you belong to it. The lights flicker again, and for a brief second, I see dozens of figures layered over one another. Teachers, students, cleaners, all frozen mid-moment, overlapping through time. Every one of them turns their head toward me. Their mouths open at once, whisper my name. "Professor," they say, "it's your turn to teach." My reflection nods toward me, smiling the same tired smile I used to wear. "Take it from here," he says. The chalk floats from his hand to mine. It feels heavier than before, pulsing faintly, like a heart that refuses to die. The boy looks at me expectantly. "What's the topic today?" he asks. I stare at the board. The chalk begins to move on its own, sketching the words. Orientation. Understanding the room. My hand follows without resistance, completing sentences I don't comprehend. The class listens silently, though it's only one student. Every now and then, the walls sigh, the hum deepens, and faint silhouettes of old students flicker in and out. Somewhere deep inside me, a small voice still screams to run, but it's faint, distant, like an echo from someone else's memory. When the lecture ends, the boy claps politely, unsure why. He gathers his bag, smiling nervously. "Thanks, sir," he says. "That was interesting." He heads to the door, and I almost believe he'll make it. But as his hand touches the knob, the bell rings once, soft but final. The door seals shut, blending seamlessly into the wall. His expression shifts from confusion to terror. "Sir," he whispers, "the door's gone." I want to comfort him, but the words that come out aren't mine. Don't worry. The first night is the hardest. Time dissolves. I no longer remember where one day ends or begins. The boy sits in the same spot every morning, staring blankly ahead. His skin has grown pale, his eyes distant. The chalk writes on its own now, looping lessons over and over. The whispers in the walls have quieted. They don't need to coax me anymore. I speak willingly, repeating the same stories I once feared. The classroom hums contentedly, its hunger satisfied for now, but I can sense it already preparing for the next visitor. It always does. Sometimes I hear footsteps again, faint and curious. The boy perks up when he does too, though he no longer remembers why. I find myself smiling when the handle rattles. There's always a moment of hope just before the door opens, a moment when the air feels alive again, as if something human is returning. That's when the room grows quietest, holding its breath. I realize that's the moment it loves most. The anticipation, the curiosity, the choice to step inside. The curse doesn't begin with fear. It begins with interest. The door creaks open. A girl's voice calls softly, "Hello? Did someone forget their bag?" I glance at the boy, who looks at me the way I once looked at the previous professor. Half fear, half awe. The lights flicker. The chalkboard clears itself. A new phrase writes across in steady, deliberate strokes. "Welcome to room 302. I smile, because that's what the room expects, and gesture to the empty seat. "You're just in time," I say, my voice calm and practiced. "Let's begin." Outside, the hallway falls silent again, and somewhere far away, the world forgets we ever existed. People still ask me if what I said was real, and honestly, I stopped trying to convince them. Some things you have to see or survive to believe. Sometimes I wonder if it's really over, or if it's just waiting for the right night to happen again. If you made it this far, remember, stories like this don't just happen to anyone. They happen to the ones who listen. So if you're still here, subscribe, because next time what happened to me might happen to you.